everyone. My name is Erica Seha. I am a content creator here with SADA Collective, and today I have Miss Nicole with me. So she is going to be chatting with us a bit about her process and her story, just so we can get a little bit more of, some insight into what you do. So do you want to just maybe introduce yourself and let us know kind of a brief introduction of what you do and kind of your background?
Yeah, of course. First, thank you so much, Sada, for including me into this interview, and of course you, Erica, for organizing everything. I'm a creative director, artist, and director based in Los Angeles, California. I work for for various organizations, but the ones that I stay true and passion to my heart is a talent management agency called Matter Media Group, where I am a full-time creative director there, as well as a co-founder to a collective called the Undocumented Filmmakers Collective.
Awesome.
Where we empower all undocumented creators across the United States, link them up with mentorship, resources, and really try to cultivate this thriving artist environment
Awesome.
where we all support each other and our growth.
Awesome. And you mentioned you were doing some work as a creative director. Do you want to let us in a little bit of what a day-to-day life of the creative director, what you're doing in that kind of realm?
I really love how you asked this conversation because I often get plagued with the idea of how the role of a creative director is so fetishized.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in Urban Outfitters, there's shirts that say creative director, and and then people label themselves as creative directors, and I'm just do people really understand what it means to be a creative director?
Yes.
And it's definitely something that I feel a lot of youth, including myself, inspire to or aspire to, but it really isn't, sometimes as creative as we would like it to be. It's very business centric. So for instance, you go from an idea, the ideation process, and you have to deal with the budget and what your teams are going to look like, and you sometimes kind of act as HR or hiring facilitator to projects, and also have to stay in line with rules and regulations and permits and things like that. So before even the creative part of the work exists, you really have to do a lot of the logistical things, and then once those are kind of tightened up, then you can get into the more nitty gritty of visualizing your clients' visions or your own visions. But even with that, there's so much math and logistical things behind it. So for instance, currently I am leading a lot of shoots, whether it's for social content or merchandise content with lines, or even music videos. A lot of these types of productions require a lot of mathematical computations around the set, right? Creative director's role is also to foresee other roles projects, so talking to set designers to make sure that measurements for the set are in line, all the way down to the camera operator and what their aspect ratio is and what they're going to shoot, all the way to of course how is this going to land on social or on a billboard or marketing assets. So there is a lot of quality and quantity assessment for a lot of these projects, and seeing making sure that everything that you're doing in the pipeline of creating a project lifeline has its intention for impact. So something that is also very important that people don't talk about is impact of your content that you're producing. And this is something that I feel as a freelance artist, as a freelance visual artist, I don't really think about, because as someone who creates you know, most of the time, like I feel like my art is for myself, and then
100%.
and and so it's really hard to kind of like talk about like what does impact mean when it comes to data sets and like numbers or like like ROI or like all these like social I guess like impact driven words when you are trying to sell a product. But so that's totally different as you take on the role as like a freelance visual artist, because like your impact is so different from say like a product or something like that.
Right, right. And so it's really just essentially just taking like a vision that you guys come up with and kind of just executing it all the way through. So you're kind of in charge of every single, I guess, other creative that falls under whatever that project may be, getting everybody in line to make sure that, you know, whatever you guys envisioned in the beginning is exactly what comes out at the end. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
And you mentioned you do like visual work as well. What do you kind of specialize in on your own time, I guess, like within your own art?
Yeah, so a lot of the ideas that I work with are centered around sustainability. And
Mm-hmm.
sustainability can mean a various amount of things. So it could be sustainability of like um, ecological sustainability, it could mean environmental sustainability, it could also mean like sustainability of like a marginalized group.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my works center around these ideas of sustainability, which all are actually related together.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, a lot of my work is very textile based.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the origins are very textile based. So, I've created works called like the Zero Waste Cart, where I created this like art installation in the middle of San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
at the toughest part of San Francisco, called the neighborhood called the Tenderloin, where
Mm-hmm.
I just sat there, did like a pop up installation,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of started, you know, sewing garments for the communities that lived in that neighborhood. And most
Amazing.
of, yeah, so it's funny, like I thought I was coming in there as an artist with a mission to kind of, you know, empower people and communities to get to know their materials of the clothing and the garment that they're using, like more utilitarian, so they can develop a relationship with the garments that they use so they don't end up in landfills.
Right.
But what ended up happening was that because I was in a particular community that didn't really have these resources, both socioeconomically and environmentally, this pop-up became and transformed into more of like a connection with people who felt like they didn't have people to talk to or like learn skills with. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting, like, you know, how teaching homeless people how to sew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they
Mm-hmm.
would sit there and speak to me and saying, like, you know, I haven't done an activity like this in a really long time. And here I am teaching them about how they could um, reuse the garments or the sleeping bags and the blankets that they had, and how to like patch it up. And they would say things like, you know, I didn't have money to patch this up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would evolve to them sharing stories about how, you know, they've been neglected, or stories about how it's rough, it's been a rough couple of months, or it's been a rough couple of years. So I started off with this intention for sustainability, like environmentally, and it evolved almost like as a sustainability for just like mental health and people who like
Mm-hmm.
definitely didn't have access to those resources.
Mm-hmm.
So I do see like how all of these um, entry points kind of have a connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's never just one thing. Like we're all
Mm-hmm.
complex beings. Like everything that
100%.
we address is kind of complex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's just like one part of the installation that continues to grow. Like, but in the pandemic, of course, like I can't necessarily actively sit in very close quarters with people teaching them like hands-on things.
Right. Kind of makes
So
that like that process of connecting with someone else and getting them to share their narrative feel much more difficult. So yeah, I guess that like leads to my next question, which is kind of how you're handling being a creative during this time and how you're still managing to kind of, incorporate those connections with other people, because I feel like, with art, that's the biggest thing, kind of what you were discussing is kind of obviously, uncovering those narratives, but then also being able to connect with others based off of that narrative. And because of, what is happening, it's so difficult to kind of do that. So how are you managing as a creative during this time, and still managing to get those narratives out of others and getting your narrative across to others as an artist?
I think it oscillates a lot. I mean, if everyone is going through so many different waves right now. So
Mm-hmm.
when I mean by oscillate, I oscillate between finding like a lot of inspiration during this time of like what are the creative ways to navigate connection. So
Mm-hmm.
like this is a way to navigate connection is through social media. But then I do find another thing where I feel like the purpose does get removed a little.
Mm-hmm.
So like the original intent isn't necessarily there.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to grapple a little bit with the idea of like how much am I kind of removing the purpose if I move forward with a new like alternative way of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't have the answers. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
grappling with
Yeah, I
that.
think we're all learning at this point. We're all just trying to learn with what we got, but it's all a
Yeah.
learning process at this point. I feel like it's just a lot of trial and error. And I feel like, we're kind of starting to get used to using a lot of different applications and stuff that are really helpful, but it's still, there's just nothing like having that like human in person connection. So yeah, it's just trying to manage, being without that and still, like you said, getting, the correct story across, and kind of sticking to one narrative, from start to finish. I feel like that's really important. And how has like this time also changed the way that you're working? Like, let's say, with the creative agency that you're working with and doing your creative direction, how has like the interaction there changed with you, especially when it comes to like managing projects and stuff, since, there has to be less people?
Oh, that's a great question. It's definitely like safety first of what, like every project is addressed, and we're definitely taking precautions when it comes to producing things. But fortunately, most of the people that I do work with have um, created their platforms themselves, which
Mm-hmm.
means that they do have tools to like edit, they do have tools to like film themselves. They've like been doing this for years
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And so like I kind of really give support more or less to kind of drive like content ideas. So like I feel like I've evolved in a little bit more as like a soundboard, like a brainstorm session of
Mm-hmm.
content, and then I become like that person that like gives feedback. So it kind of dates, I feel like the work has transitioned a little bit more into like art school days where you would like
Mm-hmm.
present your work and ask for feedback and iterate,
Right.
iterate, iterate.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't physically be in the same space anymore. There's just a lot more like enclosed, like isolated creation, and then we come together for that like feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting how like it has evolved. But for instance, like I've been fortunate to direct, but virtually direct. And what does
Oh,
that even
awesome.
mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you like virtually direct something?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was like a campaign shoot a couple weeks back, and we had to use digital tools at our disposal. So like
Mm-hmm.
Zoom, iPads, like rigs, like just trying to rig the iPad to so
Yeah.
I could have that visual like landscape. But of course there is like drawbacks to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because, I could only really see so much of the space. And then I have to lean to the people who are actually physically there. And then that goes into like a whole nother evolution of where I get really philosophical with my work of like the concept of privilege, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
does the director have more privilege because I can technically work virtually versus people are physically in the studio, like the camera operator and like the lighting technician who
Mm-hmm.
can't necessarily work that remotely through a camera.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
then like it's just like how can we even digitize their work? We're not there yet either.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. So it's just like taking steps, taking steps, but slowly but surely. Yeah, it's getting difficult, especially because there's no known end. So it's just kind of like working with what we got until until who knows how long. So, but it is very amazing to see the way the creatives have been doing different things. I am a photographer myself also, and I follow a photographer who really took what's going on and ran with it. I don't know if you saw him. I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but he did a series where he basically met with models via Zoom and like shot, shots of them via Zoom. So the pictures came out amazing. They were all over the place. And it's just, kind of learning and seeing that artists are kind of taking this. And if anybody can do it, I feel like creatives can. We have the mind for it. So
yeah.
it's really amazing to see kind of
And
how people are taking it and running with it.
exactly. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what like I'm like a firm believer, like with what Toni Morrison, there's a Toni Morrison quote, like this is precisely the time when artists go to work because we
Mm-hmm.
have that like capability to just switch and think
Exactly.
and on the spot on like different solutions that no one else is not definitely not thinking, and we have that spirit of like we're up for the challenge and we're also
Mm-hmm.
like up for like tapping into the unknown, right? Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
our work is definitely I feel like artists are molded to just be okay with not knowing what we're going to get as an end result. So like I think that that spirit is definitely like what keeps this conversation moving and going during this time. But but I think we are the people that's going to keep on changing like
Mm-hmm.
the way our systems work.
100%. I completely agree. And then I kind of wanted to uncover a little bit about you. I know we're talking a lot about, your present day work and what you're doing now, but I really truly stand by the fact, and, this whole series that we're doing, which is called Deconstructing the Narrative, is kind of geared towards kind of getting that background story from artists and from creatives and kind of like what led you to being a creative. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, what moments throughout your life or what has led you to kind of making the decision to kind of stick in this industry, because it's a really tough industry to choose to be a part of. So um, I guess I just want to hear a little bit more about your background and your story in terms of how you got here.
Of course. So, I think that it's funny how people say like it's a tough industry to go into or tap into, but I feel like the creative industry was an industry that made it possible for me to survive. So
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that is so I'm an undocumented individual in the United States, and for immigrants like myself, like you don't have a lot of like there's a lot of like barriers to
Mm-hmm.
obtain. So like for instance, I wanted to be a lawyer, and back then like I couldn't necessarily obtain like paperwork to, even go to college,
Mm-hmm.
or I couldn't even obtain paperwork for like to pass the bar. Like there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things that like immigrants like who migrated here during this time like we don't have access. So as my imagination like grew and grew, and like I wanted to visualize a world that I could see myself fit in, like I
Mm-hmm.
felt like art like didn't have those like got like strict government boundaries, like if you wanted to make a like create a painting, like there isn't somewhat like an entity saying like you can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
or if I wanted to write a book, there wasn't an entity that says like you can't write a book and publish it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I wanted to pick up a camera and create a film, like I didn't have to like have a government stamp of approval. So like there's just so many things I feel like it allowed me to do and explore like a reality again where I felt like a part of something versus against something, or not allowed to do. So when I like picked up my first camera, and when I got my like saved up my savings for my first camera, like I definitely saw it as an opportunity to like open so many doors, as opposed to like, you know, like picking up like going to school. Like I definitely didn't feel like going to school opened as many doors as me picking up my camera.
Completely. Right. Yeah. So you just felt like, you kind of found your home in the creative industry because it just allowed you to be so free and kind of do things on your own terms. That's amazing. Awesome. And what message would you say? I know you kind of talked about, wanting to portray a message with that project and sustainability. Is that something that you focus on with all of your work, or do you kind of have various different narratives that you share or have shared throughout your time being a creative?
There's always so many different narratives. I feel like the narratives change depending on what calls for me.
Hmm.
So for instance, like right now, my main narrative that I'm focusing on is like inclusivity and equity for undocumented creatives.
Hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily, um, it doesn't necessarily directly go into the sustainability of textiles or textile waste. So
Hmm.
I feel like it really depends on like the topic that I'm working on, and then I choose the mediums that best communicate those topics.
Right.
So so I think I'm never limited in what the narratives that I choose,
Hmm.
because each work is fundamentally like directed between like with what media choice or medium choice I go with.
Hmm.
So
Totally.
it might look like, for if someone were to like examine me, it's like, wow, she's all over the place. Like, how is she able to create such like a broad body of work? But
Hmm.
I don't come from that traditional background of saying like I'm a painter, I'm going to be a
Hmm.
painter for the rest
Hmm.
of my life.
Hmm.
I come from a background of like, here's a story and a narrative to tell. What is the best place to like communicate that, and how?
Exactly. And I feel like that's just inside the mind of a creative. I feel like I work very similar with like my own work, in the terms of like just kind of going with whatever's going on in my life. That's kind of what I like to portray in the moment. I feel there are a lot of people who really do stick to just kind of one thing their whole career. And I think that's really beautiful. I think that takes a lot of drive because it's really hard as a creative. Your head is all over the place and you just always want to do so many things. You're always thinking of so many projects that you could be participating in. And I feel like, to be able to just focus on one thing is such an amazing thing. But I'm very similar to you in the sense that like it's just so much easier to kind of go with the flow of life. You know what I mean? I feel like we're here to tell our story and we've chosen art as a form of telling our story. And I feel like the ability to experience certain things and then kind of take them and run with them and make them into something that's lasting and creative. I think that that's amazing. And so, there's kind of different ways to work, but I'm always interested in hearing how different artists work, as well. And then I guess another question I have for you is, like, is there any like sources of inspiration that you like draw towards, or is there anybody that you would say like you would just love to work with like sometime in your career, like kind of like a dream project?
Oh wow, these are heavy loaded
Yeah.
questions. I do find a lot of my sources of inspiration on Instagram and like through
Hmm.
collective accounts like SADA Collective, because it's like, um it like I feel like artists, for me, definitely like in this format, you discover their world, and it's so inspiring to like be able to scroll on someone's page and really tap into like their process of thinking, even though it's like just like a glimmer.
Hmm.
So I do lean a lot on social media to get that inspiration, but
Hmm.
also some like, I mean, I think my dream person, and put it out there, please.
Yeah. Put
Well,
it into the universe.
yeah, well, I have dream people, not just one person, but I have dream people. Dream people would be Miranda July. I think that
Hmm.
they are just so like funny and intriguing, but they touch on such like like delicate topics, but they do it in such like a comedic timing type of way, and it's just like that delivery is what makes like hard things be a little bit more palatable. It doesn't always have to be so like for full frontal. And you know, my dream has always been to work with Angela Davis. So I mean, how can we bridge social movements with art? And I think that the time is definitely now to do that. So if any,
100%.
and
Yeah.
it's like the best form to communicate. And then so it's like, if anyone knows Angela Davis, please let her know.
Send her your way.
And how like we can definitely like, you know, provide that change and that communication for artists, you know?
Totally, 100%. And I guess my last question would be, you know, I think it's really important that not only are we telling our story, but also, you know, helping other creatives to kind of, you know, make their way through this industry. It's a tough one, like I said. And sometimes, you know, as like with you, I think it kind of found you, but there are others who really, I feel like, want to find it. And I want to make sure that, you know, at the end of the day, we are doing everything we can to kind of give them, you know, some advice and kind of that platform to kind of feel like they have, you know, some instruction on where to go. Because I know when I was starting out, it's kind of hard to just figure out like what to do first and how to navigate, especially with everything so rapidly evolving, not only with, you know, the situation that we're in, but also with social media. Social media blew up so fast, and all of a sudden it's like everything is social media. Like if you don't have a social media, like, you know, following, it's really difficult to get your name out there. So I guess just from your experience, especially since you're in creative direction, what would you say is, you know, the best advice you would give to someone who is just starting out as an artist, in terms of like, you know, not only, you know, getting their name out there, but also navigating just as a creative in the industry today?
Totally. I would say that, you know, trends are there, but you're never going to stand out from trends. So if there's one thing to like kind of move yourself forward is find your own like aesthetic and visual like compass, and stop letting trends dictate where to go, because at the end of the day, like when there is a trend, like there's 10 other people filing like ready to like create that work in that umbrella. Whereas like I would say the one thing that I'm even striving for is for brands and creators and projects to come to me who understand my aesthetic vision and my aesthetic voice. So then I am more empowered and you are more empowered with the projects that you take on, rather than having to conform to what other people are wanting and need, just because of a trend, right? So like
Right.
nurturing more of your like aesthetic, and your creative sensibilities will get you far more out there than like you conforming to what others are wanting you to be, or what you think people want you to be.
Completely. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's so important. I just think it's important to just kind of, you know, like you said, just kind of focus on what makes you you. I feel like, you know, especially in the art industry, it's just so difficult to get any sort of notice unless, I feel like the most, you know, striking artists and the ones that are most successful are the ones who kind of, you know, go off of their narrative and go off of their story, because no two people can have the same story. So kind of just playing off of that just allows you to, you know, be separated from everybody, like from the get-go. So like you said, you know, obviously trends come and go, but at the end of the day, like your story is your story, and that is what's worth telling, and that's what we're here to do as creatives. So awesome. Well, Nicole, thank you so much. You've been so great. Your answers have been so great. I'm sure it's going to be so helpful for others to watch. I know you've really inspired me just listening to you, and you know, we really love your work, and we really hope, you know, that I wish you the best, I guess, throughout this time, and just as a creative in this industry, and just keep doing what you're doing and sharing your story, because it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you for joining us today. And as for everybody else who's watching, thank you guys so much for joining us and hearing Nicole out. Oh, also, Nicole, I wanted to see if you could just share any contact information with everybody, where it's best to reach you.
Yeah, please DM me on my Instagram. My Instagram is right under SADA Collective's handle right there. It's Nicole Solis-Sison. DM me, I'm very responsive. So that's the best way to continue the
Perfect.
conversation. Thank
Perfect.
you so
Awesome. Of course,
much.
thank you. And if anybody else has any friends, or if you're creative, or if you have any creative friends that you would want to be interviewed, we actually have an application going on right now. The link is in our bio, so you can send them over there and you guys can fill out the application, and hopefully we'll get back to you soon. And we're just looking forward to sharing a lot of more people's stories and kind of